plan for students at risk for not graduating from high school. The Youth Opportunity Project language describes an outline of deliverables focused on helping us as a LEA to spearhead a commitment to at-risk service delivery reform. Our current plan for students at risk for not graduating from high school confirms our commitments to provide support and to services to identified students beginning this month, right now. I see these as two separate initiatives, one focused on helping us improve as a school district, and the other to provide immediate customized intervention plans to identified students currently enrolled in our schools. According to our August at-risk notification numbers, approximately 10% of our current 5th through 12th grade students meet PI 25 identification criteria. I believe these numbers clearly reflect a need to maintain the momentum of our plan for students at risk for not graduating from high school, while at the same time rolling out our Opportunity Youth Project. Moving forward, I encourage district leadership to keep updates from these two initiatives distinct and separate, preventing one from overshadowing the other. I would encourage both groups of central office staff charged with monitoring and oversight to continually cross-reference the two initiatives to make sure planning is complementary versus contradictory. I am confident the Opportunity Youth Project will, over time, provide valuable insight that will strengthen our framework serving our students at risk for not graduating from high school. Thank you.
So I'm here this evening to talk about the Year 1 report plan for personalized pathways. First, I want to thank Superintendent Cheatham and the board for making this plan public and for putting it on the agenda tonight. As we learned during the rollout of the first pathway, public communication and transparency for pathways is really, really important. Pathways is a big deal. If it's implemented wall to wall, it's going to radically change instruction and the curriculum that's taught in our high schools. As a result, this report needs to be taken very seriously, and it needs to provide the board with good information for making important and potentially controversial decisions about pathways. The plan that was posted on Friday, in my opinion, won't provide you with good enough information to make those kinds of decisions. I emailed you all a lot of ideas for improvement. I can't go through all of those in 3 minutes, so I thought I'd just highlight a few of the big ones. First, the report as proposed won't compare students within the first pathway to students who are outside the pathway. And that approach, I think, is really important, and it's not the same as what is proposed in the report, which is just to compare students in the pathway to district averages. I don't think comparing to district averages is going to give you the information you need. You really need to look at students of similar demographics inside and outside the pathway to get good information. Furthermore, I think you need to know if there are structural differences that could be contributing to the success of pathways. For instance, the word on the street is that class sizes within the pathways are significantly smaller than class sizes outside the pathways. This could be contributing to the success of our students, and it would be good to know that. Likewise, years of teacher experience within and outside the pathways could be making a difference, and that would be good to know. This report needs to include budget information. We need to know what pathways costs. And what is it going to cost to expand pathways? This budget information needs to include staffing, administration, professional development, and consultant costs, as well as other expenses for the program. And finally, I think the timeline for pathways needs to be adjusted so that you have a Year 1 report in hand and the public has time to digest it and you have time to digest it before you make a decision about pathways expansion. Right now, the timeline doesn't provide for that. You'll be deciding in the spring and getting a report in the fall and then validating your decision at that point. Since I have a couple more minutes, I will also throw in that I very much appreciate that you're willing to look at ways to make middle school start times reasonable for families and for students, hopefully at not too much more of a cost to the district. So thanks for looking at that.
Okay, thank you, Chris. The next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes. I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes dated September 11th, 2017.
Second.
I was waiting for Moose. Laura, your advisory vote. Aye. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? That passes 7-0. And now we come to middle school start times. And not quite sure who's doing this, Mike. And who else?
I'll tell you if you want, PJ.
And Mike and Mike.
All right, there you go.
Mike's with ties. Mike's
Two mics with ties. How about this one, Mike?
Someday I'm not going to tie here.
Something to aspire to.
Dive right in? Okay, great. Well, first of all, this is School Board Appreciation Week in Wisconsin. Did you know that? So we appreciate you this week. And the other 51 as well.
Just wait, just wait till next week, huh?
Our topic is, boy, I'm in trouble already. Our topic is middle school start time. And I'm joined by Mike Herding, who many of you know. I'm not sure if everybody knows Mike, but Mike was our chief of school operations for years and retired last year and is back helping fill in for Karen Kepler, who's on leave temporarily. So welcome back, Mike.
Thank you.
This is an issue that's near and dear to Mike's heart, so it's great to have him alongside. So we're here to talk about the middle school start time, which is, you may know, is 7:35 a.m. for almost all of the middle schools. Badger and Wright are the exceptions to that. And we're attempting to find middle school start time, a later middle school start time, closer to 8:30, which is sort of the ideal according to the American Academy of Pediatricians. And we're looking to find the solution and begin, perhaps phasing in, but beginning in 2018-19. And to tell you briefly why we think that topic is important. We covered this ground about a year ago, but I think it's worth spending a few more minutes on it tonight. Just kind of leading with the why. Mike, who's done a lot of the, who's read a lot of the research in this area, is going to take a few minutes and just kind of go over that.
So, good evening. It's nice to have the privilege to speak with you before. Again, I think the last time was prior to my retirement when we were beginning the conversation around middle school sleep time, which was really based on a kind of a growing national trend and conversation around looking at start times based upon what we've learned about adolescent sleep patterns and knowing, particularly in winter, how dark it is and how early it is for some of our students. And so we have really asked the question, so can we make it better for our middle school kids? And so districts that have moved to later start times typically see improvements in physical and mental health, safety, and of course academic achievement. So you see it in improved grades, improved attendance, and hopefully improved intention in the classroom. So we really have this overall question is, given our resources here in Madison and what we really want to do for our children, can we make it better? And so that's kind of how we began this journey a while ago.
Okay, so with that goal in mind, with those positive outcomes in mind, we've been trying to work our way through the operational challenges associated with this issue, and there are basically four. The first is logistical, meaning what is the capacity of Badger Bus or any of the private yellow bus companies? What is the capacity of Metro, which after all is not a private bus company? They are they're a public transit entity with their own rules and their own obligations. What do we do about this bus driver shortage, which is a nationwide issue? Other logistical issues feed into this as well. Traffic on the isthmus is, is worse than it's ever been, right? And that affects our ability to get across town. What are the cycle times that we have to worry about? So logistical considerations are part of all this. They are manageable. We have a good team of people on our own staff, along with the people at Badger and Metro who are working on this. there are financial constraints to be dealt with as well. Every investment decision we make involves trade-offs with other opportunities to improve conditions. So we're looking at a phase-in approach, perhaps, both for logistical and operational or financial reasons. We think that the financial impact, as we see it, I'm kind of jumping ahead, is probably somewhere in the $600,000 to $950,000 range, if fully implemented. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. Then there's just the impact on the learner and on learning. We have to make sure that if we are going to move the times, that we move them in such a way that we actually get the results that we're intending. If we go to a lot of trouble to move the time for middle school 10 or 15 minutes, it may not do what we set out to do. So keeping, obviously, the impact on learners and learning is super important. When you look at our 7:35 middle school start for almost all middle schoolers, it's not super popular. We've surveyed on that. We've not surveyed directly, at least recently, on the 7:45 a.m. elementary start. We have early and late start elementaries, but we have 12 schools at the elementary level who are 7:45 a.m. elementaries. So between the early elementaries and the middles, we have over 10,000 students starting either at 7:35 or 7:45. And remember, that's the start time. The school bus drop-off time is actually maybe as much as 10 minutes earlier than that. So
Actually, probably 7:25,
Yeah.
7:30 for those children that want to have breakfast. So it is early.
right. So we've got a lot of kids out on the bus stops at the elementary and middle school age, as early as, the main pickup times are, most of the kids are getting picked up between 7:45 and about 7:15. There's some that are earlier than that, some are later than that. So we've got to make sure that if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. And then lastly, we've got to get through this final hurdle of just the marketplace of parent opinion. Ultimately, it's got to make sense to parents. So those are the obstacles or the challenges that we're working with, and it's an interesting set of parameters. So up to this point, we've done basically two very concrete things. First, we surveyed on the concept of a later middle school start generally, and you saw that in the memo, and it was well received, but it was kind of theoretical. Then we came back with a specific scenario that met a couple of the challenges. It certainly made sense logistically from a provider side, and it made sense financially. We tested a 9:15 a.m. middle school start time, which we've not reported back publicly on what those results said. They're in tonight's packet, so there's a public. Yeah, it's public information. It's not, but we've not reported on what do we think of those survey results. And I don't think it would come as a great surprise to say that we don't see enough support for the 9:15 a.m. middle school start time for us to continue to pursue that. But that doesn't mean that we're abandoning this project by any means. I think going forward, there are other options, and we would like to continue to pursue that, and we'd like to say that at the same time we say that we don't think the 9:15 is viable. So when we talk about our next major communication with parents, we'd like to send both messages, that we're moving away from the 9:15 option, and that we'd like to keep the door open to some other possibility, which gets me back to those gates that we've got to get through. And let me kind of foreshadow what I think the next step might look like, just based on our learning to date. It's kind of like Edison's Menlo Park lab. We've found a lot of ways to not make the light bulb, a lot of ways that don't work. We found a lot of middle school busing scenarios that we've had to just look at and dismiss. But we have found some things that we think are constants. One, we think middle school would need to move to yellow bus service. Okay, we cannot see a solution whereby we can meet these time objectives and do it within the constraints that Metro faces as a public transit operator. It's not to say that Metro is being difficult with us. It's just that they have to serve the whole city. And for us to ask for later middle school start service conflicts with their peak service obligations at the university and across the city. Yellow bus is not unpopular with parents, actually preferred, and it's actually more customary for middle school age kids. Secondly, we lose some efficiencies. So the price, we think, of moving the middle schoolers to yellow bus would be, as I mentioned earlier, somewhere between $600,000 and $950,000 versus current. We think that it have to be phased in. I mentioned financial constraints as a reason to phase in, but there's also just the burden of finding that many drivers and making that work, because they are struggling across the country to find drivers. And then a new thought. We have studied middle school start times with the idea that we would be holding high school and elementary school start times constant. We don't think that that works well. We think that if we're going to continue down this path, we have to and should look at elementary in conjunction with middle. We think that that's the right way to approach this. Yeah, so we did not test for that previously. We also have to keep in mind the needs of the parochial schools, and we have considerations around before and after school services, which wouldn't, the need and burden of that would shift with whatever times we come up with, right? So that's a planning consideration as well. So we would like to send communicate to the community in whatever form we choose that we don't think the 9:15 a.m. middle school start time is viable. We do want to keep the door open. We think that there is a path to this, but we'd like to we'd like to establish what some of these conditions are, as I've just enumerated here. And with your consent or acknowledgement or what have you, we would go forward along those lines. Mike, anything you'd like to add to that?
The movement to yellow buses for middle school would be popular from a number of standpoints that we would like to be able to do that. It's been something that's kind of been on the radar for a while, so that would be another positive benefit of being able to move forward.
Comments, questions, Dean?
Yeah, I'm curious to know if you've been in contact with any schools that have made these changes recently, and what led up to their decision to do it. I think we all seen the research that, and you laid it out, that what we can gather, but this is for many people. The 9:15 reluctance is not surprising because people are leaving their kids at home by themselves and trying to figure that. That's something that some people don't want to experience. So, what have you heard from other schools about?
Thank
how
you
that is?
for that question, Dean. I haven't done anything recently as I've come back. Prior to the last time when I prepared information, I did do some conversation with other districts, and I'm pretty sure one of them was St. Paul, which had recently gone to. And I think that if you go back to kind of the original information that was sent to you in that original board memo, it's pretty much universal in what school districts are hoping to gain by the later start time. I think one change in logistics that's happened in the last couple of years, and this is cyclical, is just the extreme difficulty that districts are having in finding people who want to drive school buses. And I've kept my license just in case that's a retirement
That's right.
option.
There you go.
So my retirement job, huh?
So that's the best I can do right now.
Okay.
Nikki?
How is this affecting, I heard from a lot of parents on extracurricular activities or after school? Like I scheduled my kid's dentist appointment, I scheduled my kid's doctor's appointment. You mentioned some in there, but are you concerned about that?
Yes. So again, thank you for that question. If you look at the survey data results, that particular question does arise. And I think what experience would show in districts that have gone to it is that it's a matter of what parents get used to and how they shift their thinking and how we as a school district foreshadow the change and how we really help them to move forward in a way so that they still realize that they can get their doctors and dentist appointments in. It's more, I think, about how we process the change.
James?
Like you mentioned earlier about the outcomes that schools that switch to later start times have experienced improved academics, behavior, those types of things. Now, is that an apples-to-apples comparison of those school districts with similar demographics to ours? Do we have that information?
Could you say that one more time?
Is that an apples-to-apples comparison, those outcome observations? Are those schools similar in demographics to our school district that have experienced those outcomes?
Off the top of my head, I don't know that I can address that specifically. Let me tell you what I believe in that. Overall, the patterns seem to be similar. And what the research would also say is just changing school start times alone isn't a magic bullet, that it's in conjunction with other changes. And I believe there's also some research which support for families with limited resource that it's particularly helpful for some of those families. But I would want to give you more solid information.
Laura?
Yeah, I'm curious as to why you said that you felt that the future direction should be coupling and changing the middle school start time with the elementary school start time, because the research that I read is like highly correlated with adolescent sleep patterns, being that like we just don't get tired until very late, and then so I feel like that problem doesn't really like go along with elementary school.
Yeah, so good question. So it's more about a capacity in our system and what we're able to do. So we have to figure out a way to increase the buses available to be able to transport middle school kids. We were talking before, having been an early start principal for a number of years and a late start, I actually think the kids are ready to go early. It's maybe more of an adjustment for parents than it is for kids. And so to pick up the flexibility in the system to be able to adjust and shift some of those middle schools to yellow bus, that the way we would do that is by adjusting elementary start times. Can you add to that?
Yeah, this is a challenge both from logistical and financial perspective, and trying to not lose the outcomes that you're hoping for. We know that if we simply added, purely additive, leave the existing structure entirely in place and simply moved middle school from metro to yellow, and pick your start time, because it could operate entirely independently of anything else. 52 buses, 52 routes, over $2 million. And we actually kind of knew that going into this several months ago. We're thinking, however, with the existing elementaries and this 12 that start early and 20 that start late, that if we can sort of re-engineer the whole package, we could bring the middle schools over and have the additive costs be, as I said, more like $600,000 and $950,000. But again, it's still got to work, right? We still have to get the times right. If we were, so we've got to hit, we've got to win on all of those accounts.
Jen?
High school under the scenario we're describing stays on Metro Bus, and its times stay the same.
Yeah.
And so they're really not a part of this discussion.
I just want to be clear for Laura and others that we're not trying to solve a problem at the elementary based on the research. It is adolescents that we're targeting.
Right.
And but we think there is potentially room to move more of our elementaries a little earlier, which would allow us to have more middle schools going later, right? We're just
Yep.
kind of shifting the burden. Does that make sense? So just want I was worried that that wasn't getting caught.
Right. Me, and then Kate, and then Nikki. First off, one of the things Mike said reminded me that, this is part of an overall wellness strategy piece that, and in fact, in some ways could easily be incorporated into the wellness plan and policy and guidance and things like that, because you're talking about, mental health, physical health, and a variety of other things. Secondly, a piece of advice is that before we go too much further forward, I know we don't want to do another district-wide survey, but we should at least zero in on some sweet spots as far as start times, because we've tested two, and one was a yes, and the other was about split down the middle. And also testing at the elementary school level, and I don't know how to do it without doing a full survey, but it would be really bad to develop another plan and find that the times picked weren't sweet spots for parents and staff. And then the third thing is that do we have expectations around both the process and a timeline? I just kind of gave one piece of advice on the process, but for seeing this go forward.
Right.
Provided that the board tonight doesn't say
Right.
stop.
Our, yeah, exactly. If we do go forward with additional planning, we're thinking that our next logical check-in point with the board would be December, January at the latest. We agree that we could end up with sort of survey fatigue if we don't do this properly. We're thinking that this would be an element in the 18-19 budget. It also requires time for families and the bus company all to adjust. So we would like to have our decision, whatever it turns out to be, for September of 18 to be decided upon in basically December, January, February window.
So what you're saying is there's a possibility that some middle schools would have new start times September of 18-19.
That's right.
Okay. I wasn't 100% clear on that from the
Yes.
memo.
Yes.
All right, okay. Kate, and then Nikki.
So my overall, very similar feedback actually around just what time are we talking about as a kind of going in idea for where we want to head towards. And I mean, even off the top of your head, I don't know if you have a time, but it's for where we think we might land.
Oh, in terms of what our kind of our ideal outcome in terms
Yeah.
of start time?
Yeah.
As close, for middle schools, as close as we can get to the 8:30
Okay.
benchmark.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, overall, I think I really like the way this is headed. I think one of the most common pieces of feedback I've heard, and certainly my kids go to an early start elementary school, so it's really hard if one of your kids is on the bus at 6:45 and the other's on the bus at 8:45, right? And so that it's hard on the front end, but it's even harder on the back end in terms of when your kids get home from school. So overall, I really liked linking elementary and middle, less from a research perspective, but just from a family kind of dynamics and logistics perspective. It's nice to have your kids get home kind of at the same time and leave the door kind of at the same time. So I really liked linking that, and if it provides cost savings on top of it, fantastic. So, and then my other questions were just what's the process from here and kind of timeline and what are the checkpoints, et cetera. So when do we actually need to make a decision by?
So if all goes well, we would take the next several weeks and make sure that that we're able to vet options that we know meet, and this would be internal, the financial hurdle as we see it, the logistical hurdle from the bus company and from, so it's getting a little violent down there.
Yeah.
This is supposed to be the easy topic tonight, I'll remind you. I think that we're pretty confident we can bring something forward as early as November, December, and the public engagement piece will have to follow that.
Nikki?
I noticed in there about cutting back on the bus passes. And I was wondering, there was on one of the plans it said that parents would be all right with later start time if we cut back the bus passes, and I was kind of confused by that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Mike, you can comment on this as well. Right now, our middle school students either ride Metro parent paid, or they ride Metro through a school district paid bus pass, or they walk or get a ride from somebody else. If we were to go to a yellow bus service model, then we would be faced with the decision to eliminate the school district provided Metro bus pass. And you saw in the survey results that idea, when pointed out, had an impact on the overall parent popularity of this idea, because the student bus pass is not just a bus pass for school purposes. It runs 7 days a week, and it runs way beyond the hours of school. So if you want to use bus pass to go to a high school football game or to the mall or to the library or what have you, right now that opportunity exists. And that is one of the many trade-offs that we need ultimately to consider internally and get parent reaction to. Yeah.
Anna?
I do like the idea of pairing it with middle school, having the elementary and middle school kind of paired together. I think when I've heard about examples where they're switching start times, that's how they're going about doing it. I also like the idea, I know, right now my son is at Cherokee, and one thing I've noticed is that it seems like some of the kids ride a yellow bus and some of the kids ride the Metro bus. And so I think it would be nice to have it either one way or the other, just because it's a little bit odd to see certain kids getting on one bus and other kids getting on the other bus. Yeah, and I think if we could do that by the time my son is in middle school, I will have fully, landed in the Hall of Fame for parents, because he complains about the early start time all the time.
Thank you.
Got one more thing I want to ask about, which is on the 915, the staff response was particularly negative. And if I recall correctly, it wasn't as positive on the previous survey as the parent response.
It was very slow.
And I guess my question is, as a board, we have to kind of balance our staff versus parents, and we're not asking you to do that. But what kind of work are we doing with the staff around this to understand their concerns better and to bring them in on the planning more? Mm-hmm. The classroom staff, the school-based staff.
I think our intent is to create a couple of what we think are very viable scenarios that the staff has something to specifically react to. We don't want to distract the staff from their day-to-day work by running busing scenarios past them that later prove to be either financially, whatever. So we want to go internally and develop what we think is our best plan, and then and we will circulate it internally, and that includes staff. And yeah, you'll have to sort out the relative weighting and I think we all come at it from what's best for kids. That's always our lead foot. Then there's also the staff perspective and other perspectives as well. And you get the opportunity to sort that out, which again is why we appreciate you during School Board Appreciation Week.
Nice time, Mike.
There, I buttoned that up well for you tonight? All right.
One more time, Mike. Last thing is just to one of the issues that James raised about across different demographics. I think that we do have one example in our own district, which is Wright Middle School, that has an 8:30 start time and has for since as long as I can remember. And if you look at some data from Wright, behavior, climate data, and some of the academic data for the across demographics, it's better than most of our middle schools. So this may or may not be a factor, but it's there. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All done?
Appreciate it.
I do want to extend my own thanks. These guys have taken this on while Karen Kepler is on leave, just to keep the ball moving forward. So we appreciate you too.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, next on the agenda is the at-risk/opportunity youth update. And Jen, do you want to introduce
I do.
this?
Thank you, TJ. Appreciate that. I'd like to invite Ricardo Hara to join me. Ricardo and I are going to tag team this presentation. And I'm really excited to share this project with the board. I do want to clarify from the get-go that this is separate from the at-risk plan. I think some of you may remember Rodney Thomas, who was my special assistant for a few years. Rodney, in his role, his job was to work on special projects where I needed the district to move faster than the rest of the organization could. I just needed him to forward something on my behalf. And he did a spectacular job in that role. He got things started that, quite honestly, no one thought was possible in the amount of time that he did. And we've all benefited from his work. This project is similar. So there is the at-risk plan, which the board has recently approved, and that's going to continue moving forward as it has. But there's a subset of work that's aligned to that plan and definitely not in conflict with it, that I need for it to move faster than the rest of the organization can. And that's what this project is about. I want to give you a little context so you know kind of how the project was born. Last year, sometimes, I don't know, this is how my life works. The universe tells you something. And I had several people in my life who were just reaching out, kind of sharing similar stories. I had Judge Everett Mitchell, a colleague, that was reaching out to me because he was seeing that some of our adjudicated youth were having a hard time navigating their way back to school. I was hearing from some of our internal staff. Denise Hetrick stands out in my mind. She works at the Urban League for the school district, finding students who've dropped out. And she was telling me these stories about students who desperately want to find a way back in, who weren't having as much luck as they should, who were struggling, that there were barriers to their success. I was hearing from Del Underbucky. Del came into my life, and Del was telling me about students in our traditional high schools who were often severely undercredited as juniors and seniors, who needed individualized, student-centered advising to help them create a path that was for them, an individual plan to success. So I had these people that I care a lot about in my life, just showing me things. But generally, the theme was that we have students who desperately want to find a path to a better future, that there were barriers, some systemic and some otherwise, that were getting in their way. And interestingly, that there were heroes out there, right, doing heroic work, helping some of them figure it out, right? So there were some examples of success, right, of heroic work being done on behalf of some of our students. long story short, I feel like we're doing some amazing work as a district, strengthening existing services and programs. There's evidence of that. Our 6-year grad rate has been going up at a pretty fast pace. Our students not known to be continuing rate, pretty much the dropout rate has been going down at a pretty fast pace. So that's good. It means that we're doing some things that are working. But I realize that we have to do things differently, and I appreciate that as a school district we love doing systems work, right? We like creating big plans, we like creating systems and routines, we're pretty good at it. But we need to lean more on creativity, right? When there are students who need us desperately right now, we've got to lean into creativity. We've got to try something, let's get them started. Figure it out, iterate, tweak it, try something else, and that's where this project came from. Ricardo joined us just this summer as our new special assistant for equity and innovation. Very pleased that he's in this role. And when we sat down and talked about the first problem that I wanted him to dig into and help me and all of us try to solve, it was this one. So that's where it goes. I want to give Ricardo props. I'm excited about the presentation he's about to provide for you. His job will be to figure something out that can be passed back to the larger organization, right? He's not going to own this forever. He does have to seamlessly pass it back, which Rodney did well with his projects, and I have no doubt Ricardo will do the same. Our presentation too is really more about awareness, and I think there will be an ask in there, but it's mainly we want you to know this project is happening because it's that important. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to Ricardo.
Thanks, Jen. It's a great context. Hi, everybody. Happy to be here in front of all of you guys. Before I dive in, I just kind of want to start off with a couple of thank yous. First and foremost, I want to thank Jen and all of you here at the board for giving me the opportunity to serve the youth and families of MMSD. I have an unwavering commitment to service and justice and equity, particularly as it pertains to like racial equity in this country. And the organizations that I've chosen to work for have always served as a vehicle for me meeting that commitment. So I really appreciate you providing that vehicle for me here in Madison. I also want to thank the many MMSD staff that have agreed to connect with the team as part of this work, and that have also facilitated our connections with the youth, the many youth that we have spoken to. Like undoubtedly, one of the greatest assets that MMSD has is its people and the passion that they have in serving this population. I love it. I also want to thank community members, our advocates who continually push us to bring our A game, right? Like Dell, man, I appreciate your advocacy, man. Thank you, I really do. I love it. And most importantly, I want to thank the youth who have essentially connected with us thus far and have given us such real talk, such pointed and thoughtful insights into just a small part of the challenges that they face at home, at their schools, and really informing how we're going to approach this work. So I wanted to start off that way. So thank you to all. So I'm going to jump right in and as concisely and clearly as I can, build from what Jen has already started, which was the why behind this project. And I'm going to dig into more of the what and the how, right? But before I do that, I just want to quickly clarify a term that may have come up, that did come up in the memo, this term opportunity youth, right? Which might be a little confusing, so I want to provide some clarification around what that term means. So I think there's really two perspectives on this. There's first the technical standpoint, and basically what the term opportunity youth is just an internal shift in how we are referring to youth that are showing up on the at-risk list. That's it, right? From a clearly technical standpoint. From an organizational, cultural standpoint, it's the beginning of work in shifting how we talk about these youth, how we think about these youth, and ultimately how we serve these youth. And frankly, I think the term opportunity youth is much, much more accurate than at risk, right? And talking with the youth here in Madison, it clearly these youth are full of hope and they're really looking for an opportunity to really get back into the game. So I just want to provide some clarity around that before I continue on. So as Jen named earlier, there are 3 subgroups that we've identified within this greater opportunity youth population that have been put especially at risk of not being on a path towards truly becoming college, career, and community ready. Those groups were adjudicated youth who are trying to transition back into their schools, youth that have essentially dropped out and are trying to get back in. And then there are the youth that are still currently in school sites, juniors and seniors that are very undercredited, that often find themselves disengaged in classrooms, and they're kind of just going through the motions. And they're kind of waiting for that next thing, but they may not know what that next thing is. So those are the 3 subgroups that this project is really focusing on. And the best way to kind of explain what we're doing as part of this work is really we're diving into the who, the why, and the how of those 3 groups, right? When we say who, we're really diving into like, well, who are these youth? We really want to connect with them on a human level and understand what are their challenges, right? What's the first thing you think of when they wake up in the morning, right? What are their hopes and dreams? And through this work, lifting not only the challenges that they're facing, but we're also lifting up the assets that they've been brought and perhaps maybe went untapped while they were at school. The second bucket of work is like digging into the why. So really digging into like what's the role that we as an organization played in all of this, right? So why were these students allowed to reach this point, right? What are the gaps in our system that may have allowed this to happen? And what are the assets that we have as an organization that we can leverage to fill those gaps? That's the second bucket of work. And the third is, to Jen's point earlier about leaning into our creativity point of view, we're really relying on a design process that is truly grounded in the human experience. So to create solutions that are responsive and effective and not just different for the sake of being different, right? But solutions that are responsive and effective and that will likely be a stark departure from like how we think of schooling. And I think that the youth that we've spoken to, like they know that, and they want that. Which I think to Jen's point earlier, that's great. I think this opportunity to really innovate is like awesome. It's an awesome opportunity. So in terms of our approach, and this is outlined in the memo, we've broken this project up into 2 big phases. The first phase is this fall semester focusing on research and development, where we'll follow this human-centered design approach, where we'll continually connect with opportunity youth, the advocates that serve them. Awesome, thank you. The advocates that serve them to really understand what's happening, to identify the gaps, the assets, and eventually craft our high-impact recommendations. As part of that process, we're going to convene groups composed of these youth, of their advocates, of MMSC staff, to provide feedback on the recommendations that we're crafting, that we ultimately hope that in semester 2, which is the phase 2 of this project, we hope to prototype some of those recommendations while paying close attention to what's working, what's not working in that prototype, so that we can refine and ultimately scale those recommendations, right? When we think about our goals for this work, bottom line, we ultimately want this work to lead to a decrease in the number of youth who find themselves in these positions, a decrease in the dropout rate, a continued decrease in the dropout rate, an increase in our grad rates, and we really want to connect these youth to some solid post-secondary plans where they really feel confident in embarking on whatever it is they choose to pursue after high school, that they're confident that they're going to succeed in whatever that is. More immediate goals, we're hoping to, like I said earlier, to prototype some of those recommendations this semester and meet some of those goals I mentioned earlier around re-engagement, around getting back on track, having those post-secondary plans. Prototyping something in the second semester on a much smaller scale with a smaller group before hopefully we scale up. Our biggest ask as part of this work to the school board. So as we continue to dive into what these recommendations look like, here it comes. We're asking for the board's continued support and your willingness to do what we have to do to support this population. We're really looking for every opportunity to embrace any possible option to support this youth, right? And it may very well be like a policy change, right? But bottom line, we won't hesitate to come back to you all for an ask, and we hope that you'll all be receptive to it when we do. That's pretty much the work in a nutshell. At this point, Jen and I would be happy to field any questions that you may have, feedback. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Dean?
Yeah. Thanks for doing this. You got kudos from our friend Dell. So that's a good sign. I philosophically am with you, and I want us to move on this aggressively, not assertively. There's the difference, and I know the difference, and I'm saying aggressively. To continue along this line, I think that the benefits we'll be able to bounce off this and learn how to be proactive. I'm a little concerned that having been a at-risk teacher in the 90s, the move away, there was a movement away from addressing juniors and seniors and then try to catch them earlier. That made sense, but then we dropped the junior and senior programs. And so there was a lag time in between, and I don't think it's made the difference that we wanted to. So the work and learns, Capital Highs were, picked up a lot of slack, but they were already there too, but we cut out some others and stopped them. School within the schools and those things. So I don't want us to see this being a cyclical thing that, well, now that we got that, we're still getting them, so we're going to switch down to 9th and 10th grade, and that didn't make sense to me then, and I won't support it now. So I think I'd be looking for something really creative. I don't care what you got to do to work with these kids. It benefits all of us later on. It's just the idea of front-loading services at an earlier age. We save so many of them from not getting into the prisons or having to come to work with me later on when they're just been through the absolute worst things that can happen to you. That's what I work with now as adults. I don't want that to happen. So the more, I'm looking for more of this, and the more that you can come and don't feel that anything that you shouldn't say this. I want to hear the things that you shouldn't think people would want to hear. Okay?
I love it.
And I also I wouldn't mind sitting in and some of these. If you do a focus group with George and his group over by the NIP and all those places, or wherever you're going to go, I wouldn't mind sitting in on one once in a while.
Nikki?
I'd like to comment on the, I work with juveniles in the jail on a daily basis. And the number one thing I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is the lack of art education, the lack of music education. I've had people whose life has been turned around by urban poetry, by poetry slams. I've had at least 2 of them, and right now we don't have anything. It's not there. We can sometimes get a grant to get them in for a few months, and then we lose them again. And honestly, I think it actually keeps people from reoffending if they see that there are other things out there. I had one client who realized she liked spoken word poetry, so she went and volunteered at the thing, paid off her restitution, worked behind the scenes, absolutely loved it. And so I would like to see some of that, because right now those opportunities are really, really scarce.
I'll have to back that up. One of the most incredible things I've ever went to in Madison was when First Wave first started at UW. They had their first show, and my son was still in high school, and him and his friends skip school took me with him. And it was the most incredibly diverse crowd I ever been at with Madison. And then First Wave used to send kids over to their students over to the high schools and set up groups, and it was real powerful performances afterwards. I've seen some significant things. I've been to a lot of shows on it. It's just powerful stuff. And that's one thing that you can think of, but I don't know. First Wave is going through some changes. I'm not sure what they're doing now, but we can do our own.
That's awesome. TJ, can I just
Yeah,
jump
go
in
ahead,
real
Jen.
quick, because I know Anna wants to get into. I want you guys to know that I've been encouraging Ricardo to make sure he doesn't have like scope creep. Like all of a sudden his project is taking out more and more and trying to solve bigger and bigger problems. We're trying to keep this very narrowly focused on the group that he's described. There will be implications, I'm sure, right, for more proactive work when kids are younger. We're going to learn for sure on multiple dimensions, but we want to keep the scope really tight. And I just want to appreciate both of your comments when it comes to willingness to be really creative and think differently.
Okay. Me and then Anna, and actually Jen's comment about scope leads into it. Some sense of the number of students we're talking about, and a breakdown by the 3 categories, if possible.
Yeah.
And just a sense, not exact.
Yeah. Great. So roughly, we're looking at with those 3 subgroups around 300 students or so. We have more accurate counts of the youth that are in schools now, who meet the criteria for being severely undercredited. It's hard to count for the youth who are transitioning in and out of Metro, for example, or transitioning from another correctional treatment facility. But it's around, it's around 300 students.
Okay. And the dropped out number, the quote dropped out, and
I'd have to get back to you on that. It's included in that 300 number
Okay.
because they are identified within the at-risk list. Yeah.
Okay.
But I'll come back to
and
you.
I guess the last thing, on the Metro, I know that Metro serves all of Dane County,
Yeah.
and so and generally there's 12 to 15 youth incarcerated at any given time. Usually, some of them are there for months and months. Most of them are there for less than 10 days. And so I guess, kind of taking that. Are you targeting, those who are there for 10 days, or those who are there for the month, kind of thing?
Yeah.
Or both?
I think the work initially began with looking at what's happening within those sites, but the focus is their transition back, because what we found is that they've had trouble transitioning back into their school sites.
I think even if it's a day, TJ, I think that once you're adjudicated, there's a stigma that comes with that. There are barriers that fly up. I mean, let's be real.
There's trauma that's experienced in those spaces. And that's why any youth that has a touch point with Metro is part of this group that we're working with.
One more question, then Anna, which is that when you're talking about the prototype, that's what you called it.
Yeah.
But you didn't say pilots.
Yeah.
I was two questions related to that. One is I think that, and I'm sure you probably found this, that there may be some commonalities about the kind of services and opportunities that you want to create for these students, but there's also probably a variety of needs that it's not going to be, one prototype fits all. So I guess my question on that is the prototype going to be, many many things, or are you going to try 1 or 2 or 3 kind of high impact possibilities?
That's what we're exploring right now. We're hoping to ideally prototype 1 to 2 things, whatever those things may be. Yeah. Is that?
And
I think we understood each other. It was kind of hard to speak in this, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, but let me try, TJ. I think that what we're realizing is that this is not necessarily about creating another program that fits yet another kind of student experience profile, but it might be prototyping a particular way of working. It could, right, like the strategy or strategies that we employ have got to account for the fact that we've got 300 students in this particular group of kids who have probably vastly different and unique experiences from one to the next. So the prototype or types that we build are going to have to account for that. So we'll report back, but I think that has to be part of it.
Anna.
Just a quick question and comment. So who's on your team?
We're currently transitioning right now, but the folks we currently work in our working group, Caroline Racine Gillis, who was one of the main authors of the At-Risk Plan, right? Jennifer Waldner, TJ McCrae, Brian Holmquist is like the initial starting group that helped welcome me as I came into MMSD to help welcome me in and transition to the first phase of this work. Yeah.
Okay, good.
I'll just add that we are working on, this is a great pivot point for us to recalibrate who should be on the team in this next phase. We're also going to be talking with the Superintendent's Human Relations Advisory Committee coming up later this month, SHRAC for short. Long-standing committee that most of you are probably familiar with that consists of many youth-serving organizations and many organizations that touch the population that we're talking about in some way, shape, or form. So I think they're going to be great assets to the work that Ricardo's doing as well.
Thanks, Jen.
Excellent. Yeah, and just a comment, I appreciate that you're doing this work. It's something that's very important to me. I think moving forward, one thing that would be nice to explore is, a lot of times when we talk about services or programs, we talk about like schools serving the students, but I think in my work, what I have found a lot of times if we can create support people or services for parents or caregivers, it can be a really high leverage way to get students engaged, empower families, empower students. And so I would just encourage you to look at look at that and see if that becomes a theme.
Yeah. Thanks, Anna.
Anyone else? Thank you. Look forward to the updates.
Thank you all.
And hearing good things.
Yeah. Thanks, CJ.
Okay, our final agenda item tonight is the Pathways one-year evaluation. And it looks like Bo.
Yeah, I think Bo, at least
Sydney
you're joining us, right?
and
Oh yeah,
Sydney
that's
and
right.
our board members and Lisa and our board
And-
members are
yeah,
all leaving. So,
exactly.
yeah, why don't we take
a
why
couple
don't we take
minutes?
3 to 5 or whatever.
Thank you. Okay.
I'll wait for them to come back. Oh, she's just.
It seems to make sense. Board was presented with a Pathways evaluation plan. A couple board members asked for an opportunity to discuss it and give feedback as a board, and thank you for creating this opportunity. And I guess, do you want to start with an overview of it? Because we really this hadn't been planned. So I'm not sure how we want to do
Yeah,
this.
I'll just say a quick word, but we thought Bo could give a nice, short, concise little overview.
Sounds good.
I just wanted to remind the board, and thank you for this opportunity for feedback. This will be important information for the board, given decision-making about where we want to go with pathways for the future. It's a tricky thing because we want to provide robust enough information on the first year of pathways, both implementation and outcomes, and we're trying to be very cognizant of the limitations of a one-year study. So Bo is the lead quantitative researcher on our team. We'll try to break those challenges down for the board to some extent. But no, that's what we're looking for. We're trying to find that right balance. Enough information and good decisions, and not kind of over-promising that we can prove things that aren't possible to prove in 1 year's time. So I'll just put it there. We do have April meeting with the board to look at preliminary data. We've been talking about how we can flag in this document and the next iteration of it all the information that you would have by that time. And then you would have the complete set of information by the fall of next year, because we'll need the summer to wrap it up. So with that said, I'll just pass over to Bo to walk you through it.
Yeah, great. So I want to echo Jen in thanking you for the opportunity to get some feedback tonight. We've also gotten some really thoughtful feedback via email as well, so I'd like to thank everyone who's weighed in so far. Ultimately, we just want to do some work here that's going to be useful for everybody, so we are happy to have this back and forth. So we'll just talk a little bit about how we came to this plan, some of the decisions we made, and then open it up for your feedback as well. I'll start by noting, too, that this is a draft plan, so we didn't consider this final, we didn't consider this complete. Opportunities like this are going to help us refine it and get to a place where we all feel really good about where we're going with the work. So as we were drafting this plan over the last several months, our goal was to do formative work that was robust enough that we can all make some informed decisions about what's going on with personalized pathways, highlighting the things that are going well and the things where we maybe need to look at some improvements, but not quite the same thing as a full comprehensive program evaluation. So our work in getting to this point, we reviewed work in other districts that was done on things like personalized pathways, similar projects, looked at how it aligned with our past work, as well as the evaluation cycle that you all have seen. Worked with program staff and people involved with personalized pathways to go through multiple drafts of this plan. Went through the central office training on personalized pathways, met with external experts like WEC, Learning Labs, Linked Learning, the Education Systems Center, all people that have helped informed our thinking in getting to the plan that you see in front of you today. We also took some time to brainstorm all the data that we thought would be available for this kind of work, and narrowed it down to the items that we thought were going to be the most relevant. And as part of that process, we spent a lot of time weighing the pros and cons of different designs and methods that we could use. I wanted to talk a little bit about one of those design choices we made in particular that we've gotten a lot of feedback on already. So as we think about kind of answering these major research questions around the implementation of personalized pathways and what we're seeing for some early short-term student outcomes, one of the things that we need to think about is how we're going to compare the results of Pathways students to something that will give us some context and think about kind of what those results mean for us, because we're well aware that looking at the results of Pathways students in isolation isn't necessarily going to tell us what we need to know about the things that are going well and the things that we might want to work on a little more. So you probably know that Personalized Pathways did start with a lottery process. And from a research design standpoint, a lottery can often give us a really nice opportunity because you might have a pool of students that were interested in participating in the program that we didn't have space for that would provide a really nice natural comparison group. Now I'd say it's a good thing that we were able to have the program serve most of the students that applied. So, looking at those students who applied but didn't get selected for the program wasn't really an option for us. So another thing that we ended up talking through quite a bit is working on a matched comparison group of demographically and academically similar students for these comparisons. Ultimately, the reason that we didn't recommend that approach within this draft plan is that we're concerned about what we'd call admitted variable bias. In simpler terms, we think there's something about that decision to apply for personalized pathways that might make a student more likely to succeed in the program, or might affect their outcomes once they get there. So once we saw the results of the lottery and knew that we didn't have a huge pool of students who applied but weren't accepted to draw from, we thought there's something about this interest in applying, there's something about being drawn to pathways, that there's not really a great way to model for that statistically. So we did spend a lot of time talking about that, and of course it's something that's technically possible to find a group of academically and demographically similar students. But our concern with that approach is that comparison group we created might be students that just weren't interested in this particular pathway or this approach. And so that's an approach that is, kind of usually reserved for something where you're getting closer to causal claims or saying that the program is causing these differences. And we were concerned that using an approach like that when we didn't have a good pool to draw from of students who had applied for the program would be kind of implying some causality that we weren't necessarily comfortable implying. So that's why within this plan we did suggest comparing to district averages to provide some context. Now we have heard via email, via some other venues that that may not have resonated particularly well, and we've heard a suggestion that we maybe want to compare early outcomes for Pathways students against everyone who's not participating in Pathways. And based on what we've heard, we're definitely willing to consider doing that. Yeah, but that's just kind of a little bit of context about our design process, how we thought through these comparison issues. And part of that also goes back to kind of what we saw as the purpose of this report, which really is formative improvement, helps them make some informed decisions. And I did want to note that we're talking about a year one report here. As part of the evaluation cycle, we do have further comprehensive evaluations that occur every few years after that. And we had planned, although that's not part of this plan that's written here, we had planned to work on some kind of matched comparison group or something like that when it comes time to do that full comprehensive evaluation. I think as we work with the program and as we see how it develops, we're going to learn a lot more about student enrollment patterns within the program, attrition, retention, things like that, that might give us some ideas about other student groups that we might be able to draw from for those comparative purposes.
I have one question,
Yeah.
and Kate had her hand up.
Sure.
Can you just say, it's not actually a question, but can you just, there's, I believe, 2 separate partner evaluations that are scheduled in the works kind of things. Can you describe what those are? Just get the big evaluation picture.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I haven't been closely involved with a lot of those efforts, but I'll do the best I can.
I have vague memories of both of them. But
weigh in as well. Yeah. So I'll just say something quickly. I think ours is really focused on what we're seeing within MMSD. There is a larger effort that is kind of more about implementation and conditions that's involving other districts as well.
I think you're referring to part of our partnership with Great Lakes.
Yeah.
And so part of the partnership with Great Lakes is to do more of a regional evaluation as well as an evaluation across the 4 districts that we're working with. So Northwest Suburbs, Ohio, and Rockford as well. So nothing that will give us kind of the details of like the kind of boots on the ground here in Madison in our individual high schools.
And isn't there a UW evaluation also in the works?
No.
I thought somebody at UW was doing one.
Originally, Great Lakes was considering to partner with WCER, but instead they chose another organization. So I think that's where that
maybe that's where the confusion came from. All right, thank you. Kate?
Thank you, Bo. That was a great introduction. So I wanted to start with objectives and talk about methods second. So I think you just brought up a bunch of the method feedback, which we should talk about. My biggest challenge with this, or maybe my biggest pushback here for us to align on, is really what is the objective, right? What is the question? What I read in this, and I think what I just heard you say as well, was very aligned, which is around formative improvement. So what have we learned? And from my perspective, the board needs to make 2 or 3 major decisions in the time frame that will be informed by this report that are quite different than what have we learned, right? We first need to decide if we continue to fund this program at the level that we're funding it, or how we continue to do that. We need to decide if we're going to go wall to wall or not. And then at some point, we'll need to decide what the next pathway is. after all of those things, I think we get to improve and continuously improve and kind of get into the nuance that we might learn from some of the questions that I see you delving into. But I think we have to pass go first. And so for me, I'm hoping to get some more pointed information that helps answer those questions. And those questions, I think, come back to, is this better than before? And is it good enough to want to double down, right? Is it good enough to continue? Given the financial implications, the significant change it is for our students, our staff, our community, and the amount of work involved in putting it together. So for me, my kind of push and maybe push to us is I know we got a lot of feedback on method today, but I kind of wanted to hold us for a minute on objectives to give you clarity around what we want to learn, and then we can talk about method second, if you don't mind me kind of
that's all right.
Facilitating all of this.
But I'll go to methods after Nikki or what we want to learn.
So,
I have to agree with Kate. The key is, and as I said, I'm a big quote person. Everyone knows, if you read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the meaning of life is 42. The key is how you answer the question, what you're trying to find that answer is. I don't think we know what we're asking. And I don't think until we know what we're asking, we can do a full comparison of it. Because we can't understand it. We have to ask the right questions first, and then tailor the methods after the question.
In terms of objectives, I've thought really deeply about what kind of information would help with the decisions that Kate outlined and on these timelines. And I've come to the conclusion that there's nothing less than 3 years worth of data that I could vote wall to wall on. Just if we have less than 3 years data when that decision comes before me, I'll just vote no. Doesn't mean I would vote no on any expansion prior to that point, but I think that the limited experience of, we're looking at April according to our last timeline, we have pathways, finalized scope of pathways expansion and timeline is an April thing. We've got essentially a semester's worth of data. With all the problems and constructing a comparison group and things like that and unobserved variables and all those issues that are there. And I think that there's a lot we could do with 3 years. I'd like 4 years, but I found myself able to push back to 3. And so that, there is no evaluation we could design. Anyone could design that would make me able to make that decision in April, and that doesn't mean that I wouldn't like to see some changes with this evaluation, but that's really the best I can do, and I don't know where others are on that, but it is a big change. I am not convinced that partial pathways is undoable. And so that's Dean.
Yeah, the idea of implementing a project-based system appeals to me. In a lot of ways, if it's done properly. We've talked about that a lot. Some of the comments we got today did resonate with. If we're going to do an evaluation, well, sure, use the averages, but why not also compare it to a group and get both of those things? That would I think add to all the data that we would get at, and we could learn something from that. So it makes sense to compare it to some group, as opposed to just a general thing. I think that made a lot of sense, and a lot of the folks that were sending some of the emails we got today weren't just reacting. They had like letters after their name, and so they kind of knew this better than I do, you know. So but it also made a lot of sense just from the my reading of it. A couple other things that some of the folks mentioned that also kind of resonated with me was the trying to get some information on people that leave it. That would clearly be useful. And then the evaluators themselves, is there a way we can bring someone from the outside in to join that team? That would make make it a little bit more on the surface, on the face, more legitimate as well.
Mary?
Just touching on or staying on some of the points that have already been mentioned, because I think I agree with Kate about what are we trying to decide, which I think ties in to TJ's point. I would certainly, I'm with TJ to understand before we go wall to wall, we need significant amount of data, and whether 3 years or 4 years, I think that's a discussion that we'd want to have with the administration to understand how implementation is affected, and how might that stepped-in implementation actually work for our schools and our staff, and a larger issue. But I do think it is so enormous and has so many implications. And so when I think to Kate's question about what I'd really want, what I want to know is I want to know whether students are better off in this program than they'd be in otherwise. And I will go to methods because it follows from what I'm talking about, is that I want to hear more about from the not wanting to incorporate the bias that comes from wanting to be in the program. Because I actually think that might be the most important factor of the program. I actually think that bias, if the program is successful, that's the bias we want. And that's because if students are excited about being in the program, I would imagine they do better. So I wouldn't want to, so what I'd want to see is that's the question, is by being in a program that is oriented towards a specific field that you're interested in, actually have the impact. And so if you can take a student and compare that student to perhaps the best, if we say that past performance is the best predictor of future performance, and you take 8th graders who are not in a Pathways program, and you can do this better than me, but versus 8th graders who are in a Pathways program, do we see a significant improvement in being in the Pathways? And I'm okay with the bias, but I think some really good questions also could be come out of it, that, or answers maybe, that are helpful along the lines of other things you'd want to know. I want to know to some of the people who sent in feedback. Is it because it's a smaller class size? Well, that could come through from surveying the students. Oh, one thing I really loved about this was more attention from the teachers, or better relationships, or what, or was it the studying, or was it additional off-site learning? Like, those are the things. What is it? Because so is there the impact? Is a student better off from the program? And if so, what specifically about the program is perhaps causing that? And do they have a higher expectation when they come in the program, maybe from when they finish? Did it meet or exceed your expectations as to what you thought? How likely are you to continue in it? So I'm okay. Actually, I want to see the bias. Like, the bias to me is the whole point of the program.
Laura?
Can I actually, unless Laura, are you on the same topic? Because I actually would like to hear Bo's thoughts on that particular issue of the bias.
Okay. Yeah, no, I thank you for that comment. I think that's really interesting, and yeah, the idea of leveraging bias as an asset in the evaluation is, yeah, we hadn't thought of it that way, but I do think that's worth thinking through a little bit, because yeah, part of the issue is motivation, inspiration, the desire to participate, and if we assume that that's always going to be there, if we find other pathways or other options that are going to draw in students, yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah.
Laura.
Yeah, I do think that is very important in terms of thinking about forward to the decision of going wall to wall, because I wonder that if that bias, which I do think is a really strong factor, if the boost that students get from being excited and opting in would be diluted if it became something that you had to do versus something that you saw and were immediately attracted to it, where it was like a special thing rather than like it was just blank, like the foundation for everybody. So.
I'm going to go again. You know, I completely understand that the unobserved variable and that you didn't want to imply causality, but I do think that some kind of matching, whether it's propensity matching or some other one, and with, you know, with nice caveats all around it, right? And that kind of thing is really called for. And I also would and now I'm going into methods a little bit. I would also consider doing some. You know, if you model students, model backwards too, perhaps, and say, because, you know, when pathways didn't exist, kind of question, to compare to past students, because I think that we do have, you know, some rich data there. Couple other things that just in terms of data that I think, number one is I think that in terms of the student survey and climate things, you have kind of like to be determined later.
Yeah.
I think really zeroing in on things like engagement, class sizes. Families I've heard from very positive things about pathways so far this year, and each and every one of them made a point of saying, and my child has no interest in the health field, which is an interesting kind of, you know, thing, but there's something going on there. I would look at teacher teaching loads, numbers of students and things like that, as well as the class size that other people mentioned. Yeah, the climate stuff, and I know, the other thing that comes up is that a couple places on the inputs it talks about, you know, if we do rigorous this and rigorous that. I do think that we need to have some sense of, especially when we're talking project-based learning and related things, of the level, you know, are these students receiving and learning at various, you know, I don't like the word rigor, but is it comparable? A couple people also brought up questions around the embedded honors. I think that that's a bigger conversation, but this is a very, very small piece of that could be there. And the final thing is, I just, you know, we've talked about the kind of the board decision-making pieces. You know, I see kind of two things. One is the implementation program improvement piece, and the other is the board decision-making. They overlap somewhat, but not that lot. I think in terms of the program improvement and implementation stuff, you did a really nice design. So I just wanted, you know, the other pieces, you know, I think that the demands, the stakes in some ways are higher. So that's Mary?
TJ, I have a question for you. Is what was the motivation for students to go in the pathways health pathway with no interest in health?
Smaller learning communities, better supports.
And that came through in the staff selling the program, saying these will be.
You will have supports. You will and I think also the sense of a sense of community cohort kind of things. But the smaller learning and increased staff supports were the two pieces, which are not ACP pieces. They're something else. And so yeah, that was it. But it was that you will be part of this group, and it will be 100 students roughly. You will be closer with them, and there will be dedicated staff who will be part of this group also. And those are the two pieces that that the families so far, everybody's saying it's only been a month, but those are the pieces that people that I don't know if that's why they went in, but it's what they are giving positive feedback about. So I don't know why they applied, but I do know what they're saying now. Yeah, Cindy looks like she needs to respond to that.
I did just want to chime into that question, Mary. I think we have larger than a handful of students that have said the same thing, that they have no interest in the health services field, but because of the other aspects of pathways, right? Not being a program, but kind of the way we do school. So this small learning community, a small knit set of teachers, integrated projects, the experiential learning opportunities, all of those pieces have really been what kids want and what kids were thriving for that they potentially didn't get in middle school. We had a family that came up to Alex when we did our expo last year, and the child said to Alex, like, I have no interest in the health services, but this sounds like a perfect fit for me. I don't care about that aspect of it. I want these other services that come with it, and the way that the relevance to learning. So I would bet that when you guys come out to the schools and when you get into the classrooms and have conversations with the kids, it would be a great question to ask, and I would guarantee that there'll be a split of kids that were very interested in one of the thousands of jobs within health services and others that have no clue, but because of that. So
Mary, one more time, and then Anna.
Oh, no, go ahead,
okay.
Anna. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm on.
Okay.
No worries. I'll be quick. I would just say thanks for your work on this. I also agree that I would like to see some comparison group done. And then I also would say that I would want to have more information on the outcomes prior to going wall to wall.
Now, Mary.
It seems to me like I actually don't really care why they get in the program, right? I mean, like, or what they're saying. If they're in school and they're engaged in learning, right? I don't think we should necessarily feel they're 8th graders, right? I mean, they're choosing whether they think in 8th grade they want to be in a health field or not. I think that that engagement factor is high, so that doesn't concern me so much, but it certainly impacts the design as to how we move forward and how we attract and keep students engaged in school. The last thing I would add is with regards to engaging the students who we have had the most challenges in terms of engaging in high school, and how specifically is this affecting students. Did we get many of those students in the program, and if so, how are they faring?
I'm actually going to pick up on that, and then Nikki. One of the things is, when you look at comparison groups, I think one of the things is to look at students who are in the bottom 25% on MAP scores, and see if if we're being and do maybe quintiles in MAP scores, and do something like that, and build comparison groups around that, because I think that we need to know if Pathways is doing wonderful with students who were already doing well, it's a very different thing than students who were on the edge or below the edge. And I think that we need to know that in some sense. Nikki?
What Mary said struck a chord, because I think it does matter somewhat on why involved, because one thing I'm hearing from a lot of parents is the rigidity of Pathways about having 8th graders make a decision that they may be responsible for their future, when high school is supposed to be about experimenting. If you want to take pottery, take pottery. If you want to go take welding, take welding. You may not have another chance to do it, and I'm afraid we're going to lose that if we go wall to wall, if those extracurriculars can be fit in.
Kate?
So just to maybe add a couple of other comments on the methods piece, and I think they've kind of been covered. I mean, the past looking, I think there's a lot you could do there, either with same students, with alternate students from a comparative set. But I think we have to have something like that to answer if it's better than before, and if it's and we need something quantitative there to understand, is it good enough, right? Is it enough better to warrant the investment? The second on demographics, I think, going back to this idea of targeted universalism, is it better for the students that we're targeting while not being worse, or within kind of some parameters for everybody else? So how you want to slice and dice that, to me, it's slightly different than MAP scores, but I think there's probably cohorts including special education, advanced learners, by race, right? There's a fair number of cohorts that we would want a slice and dice. So, and then the last is what we've talked a lot about has been what are the choices we would make with that formative learning, right? What are the program improvements, and they're around class size, and they're around experiential learning and projects and small learning communities. So I would over-optimize on understanding that kind of information and maybe less of the metrics you've got in here, right? You've got a lot of metrics that we already gather in here. Those metrics are slow to move by and large. They're going to be slow to show dispersion among groups, and it's far more actionable for us to understand what students want more of, what they want less of, right? What was the thing that kind of resonated? So I would just go back to the choices that we're going to make with it, and the program design choices, I think, are probably the most useful information we can gather.
Anyone else?
Yeah, do you have questions for us?
So something, Kate, your comment and comments from others did make me think too that some of the questions that we'd gotten ahead of time were about what it means to disaggregate demographic groups when it's appropriate, and I did want to clarify what we meant by that too. When we use the word appropriate, we're just talking about student privacy and data suppression issues. So we're not going to be disaggregating data if we're compromising individual identity and outcomes, but otherwise our standard approach is to disaggregate all the data by kind of the standard reporting groups that you're all used to seeing, and we absolutely would continue that with this work.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
As you can tell, we're all excited to see the results.
Well, I'll make one comment, but since you're here, Bo, I want to thank you for all the work outside Pathways. But since you have come on board, we have seen a tremendous improvement over the years that I have been on the board with the analysis. And even when Dean said something about an outside group, I was like, oh no, we don't. And I know you had that for good reasons, but my natural reaction was just, I really believe you do really, really good work, and it makes my job as a school board member a lot easier. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right, thank you. I will entertain a motion to move. Is there a second?
Second.
Laura, your advisory.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. We are adjourned.
Bo, say hi to your dad for me, please.